He didn't just make Johnny Carson laugh. He changed what it meant to be a Tonight Show guest. Don Rickles, the insult comic known as Mr. Warmth, didn't follow the script, didn't wait for permission, and never cared about being polite. He broke through the polished surface of late-night TV and brought a kind of chaos America had never seen before. While most guests came on to promote a movie or tell a safe story, Rickles came on to destroy egos, including Carson's. He turned the stage into his playground, roasting celebrities, mocking Carson's appearance, even hijacking the set itself. And instead of fighting it, Carson surrendered, night after night. The king of late night let himself be the punchline, and the audience adored it. For millions watching at home, these weren't just jokes. They were cultural lightning bolts, proof that television could be unpredictable, dangerous, and hysterically funny all at once. Tonight, we're counting down the 8 funniest Don Rickles moments with Johnny Carson. Each one is a reminder of how comedy can rewrite the rules of television. But number 1 is the kind of moment you never forget. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was more than just late-night entertainment. It was the heartbeat of American television during the Golden Age. Every evening, millions of viewers tuned in, not just for jokes, but for a shared ritual. Carson's monologue, his quick wit, and that unmistakable studio laugh became the soundtrack of a generation. The stage itself felt iconic. The velvet curtains, Doc Severinsen leading the NBC orchestra, the hum of anticipation as the cameras swept across the audience. In sepia-toned memory, it was a simpler time, when families gathered around a single screen and every unscripted laugh carried the weight of national conversation. Among the endless parade of celebrities, few stood out like Don Rickles. Known as Mr. Warmth, his title was, of course, a joke. Rickles was the undisputed master of the insult, a comedian who turned mockery into art. Where others were careful, Rickles was fearless. He teased stars, poked fun at audiences, and even targeted Carson himself. And that's precisely why he became such a fixture on the show. Carson admired him, tolerated him, and sometimes braced for impact when Rickles walked through those curtains. Together, they created moments that weren't just funny. They were electric, unpredictable, and unforgettable. This was classic Tonight Show magic, a dance between host and guest that still makes us laugh decades later. At moment 8, Rickles took aim at Carson's suit. It began like any ordinary Tonight Show conversation. Carson leaned back, polished and composed, dressed in one of his trademark suits that seemed as much a part of the show as the desk itself. But Don Rickles never let anything slide, not even fabric. With a quick glance and that mischievous grin, he launched an attack that had nothing to do with Carson's questions and everything to do with his wardrobe. "Johnny, where do you shop? At a gas station?" Rickles quipped, sending the audience into hysterics. Carson, caught off guard, tried to hold his famous poker face, but the corners of his mouth betrayed him. He adjusted his tie, chuckled under his breath, and muttered something only half audible. Yet the studio was already shaking with laughter. The genius of Rickles was in the timing. He never rehearsed insults. He simply saw the target and fired. With Carson himself often in the crosshairs, and while other hosts might have bristled, Carson leaned into it. His grin widened, his shoulders relaxed, and suddenly he wasn't the untouchable king of a late night. He was the butt of the joke, standing side by side with the audience in laughter. For millions watching at home, it was pure joy. The most respected man on television, humbled in the most harmless way possible. This wasn't mockery. It was comedy alchemy. And in that moment, Carson and Rickles proved why their chemistry was unmatched. At moment 7, Rickles gave Carson a nickname that would never die. Hockey puck. It happened in the middle of an otherwise routine exchange. Carson was setting up a question, his tone smooth and professional, when Rickles suddenly cut him off. With a sly grin, he leaned forward and barked, "You hockey puck!" The audience froze for half a second, unsure if they'd heard right, before erupting in laughter. The insult was absurd. Carson wasn't an athlete, let alone a hockey player. But that was the magic. Rickles could turn nonsense into a punchline simply by the way he delivered it, sharp, quick, and dripping with affection masked as ridicule. The phrase stuck instantly, and the Tonight Show crowd began to anticipate it each time Rickles returned. Carson's reaction made the moment timeless. He tilted his head, narrowed his eyes, and let the silence hang just long enough to make the laugh louder. Then, with that signature grin, he surrendered to it. From then on, whenever Don Rickles appeared, hockey puck was guaranteed to echo through the studio. What began as a throwaway insult transformed into a trademark. Fans repeated it, comedians quoted it, and Carson himself could never escape it. In a way, it became a symbol of their relationship. Rickles mocking without mercy, and Carson accepting it with grace, knowing the audience loved every second. It was silly, it was simple, and it was unforgettable. At moment 6, Rickles didn't wait for an invitation. He stormed the Tonight Show set. Most guests entered to applause, introduced formally by Carson and the band. But not Don Rickles. On one unforgettable night, he appeared out of nowhere, wandering straight across the stage as if he owned it. The cameras scrambled to follow, the band stumbled mid-note, and Carson, caught completely off guard, looked both shocked and amused. Rickles wasted no time. He strolled up to Carson's desk, picked up the host's coffee mug, and squinted as though examining a crime scene. "This is what you drink? No wonder you're so tense," he fired, drawing roars from the audience. Carson leaned back, chuckling in disbelief, his usual control over the show slipping away. The brilliance of the moment wasn't just in the joke, it was in the audacity. In the polished world of network television, where every second was scripted and timed, Rickles shattered the format. He turned a late-night institution into his personal playground, and the crowd loved him for it. Carson, ever the professional, could have pushed back. Instead, he leaned into the chaos. His laughter, genuine and uncontrollable, told viewers at home that even the king of late night wasn't safe when Rickles was around. For audiences, it was proof that live television could still surprise, that anything could happen when Don Rickles walked on stage. At moment 5, Rickles turned his fire on other guests, proving nobody was safe. Not even legends like Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin. The Tonight Show was often a polished showcase of Hollywood's biggest stars. But when Rickles shared the couch with icons, the room shifted. One night, sitting beside Frank Sinatra, Rickles leaned over with that mock-serious tone and asked, "Frank, do you mind if I breathe while you're here?" The audience howled, and even Sinatra, notorious for his tough reputation, burst into laughter. On another occasion, Dean Martin tried to keep a straight face as Rickles poked fun at his drinking persona. "Dean, I didn't know they served cocktails backstage at breakfast," Rickles quipped, and Carson nearly slid out of his chair from laughing. The crowd roared, loving every second of the chaos. What made these moments electric was Rickles's fearlessness. He wasn't intimidated by stardom, wealth, or reputations that made others tread carefully. If you sat within reach, you became part of his act. And Carson thrived in those exchanges, watching Rickles dismantle the mystique of Hollywood royalty, then swooping in with a grin or a comeback to keep the energy alive. For viewers at home, it felt like being invited into a private roast. They weren't just watching celebrities, they were in on the joke. And in those nights, Carson's stage became more than a talk show. It was a comedy battleground where even legends had to take the hit and laugh along. At moment 4, Rickles didn't just joke on stage. He dragged Carson's private life into the spotlight. Most comedians stuck to what happened under the studio lights. Rickles, however, loved to blur the line between on-camera and off-camera. One evening, in the middle of a casual chat, he leaned over Carson's desk and said, "Johnny, I played golf with you last week. You spent more time in the sand than Lawrence of Arabia." The crowd erupted. Carson, who had tried to keep his golf game private, threw his head back in laughter, his cover completely blown. Another night. Rickles teased Carson's reputation for being guarded. "This man has more locks on his house than Fort Knox, and that's just his bedroom." Rickles cracked. The studio audience howled, while Carson, red-faced, could only shake his head and grin. What made these moments stand out was the intimacy. Viewers felt as though they were being let in on secrets Carson never intended to share. Rickles transformed personal details into punchlines, and Carson allowed himself to be the target, knowing it made for television gold. For audiences, it was pure magic, seeing the king of late night humanized, exposed, and still laughing. And with every jab, Rickles reminded us that the strongest bond between them wasn't just comedy, it was trust. Without Carson's willingness to laugh at himself, those unforgettable moments would never have existed. At moment 3, Don Rickles hit Johnny Carson so hard with insults that the king of late night turned bright red, while the studio nearly collapsed from laughter. Carson had asked a routine question, expecting a clever answer. Instead, Rickles squinted, pointed straight at him, and fired. "Johnny, that suit! My dry cleaner wouldn't even touch it!" The audience howled. Carson leaned back, biting his lip, his composure slipping away. But Rickles wasn't finished. He jabbed at Carson's calm persona, adding, "This man hosts America every night, and he still looks like a substitute teacher nobody listens to." The crowd roared louder, clapping in rhythm. Carson's face flushed crimson, his hand tugging at his tie as though he could laugh his way out of it. Then came the knockout. "Don't worry, Johnny. You're not handsome, but you're rich. That's why we put up with you." The eruption of laughter shook the studio. Carson doubled over, unable to fight back. His legendary cool shattered for all to see. What made this moment legendary wasn't just the words. It was the vulnerability. Viewers at home saw Johnny Carson, the unflappable host, reduced to the butt of the joke. And only Don Rickles could turn America's most powerful man in television into a blushing target and make him love it. At moment 2, Don Rickles gave Carson the shock of his career by storming onto The Tonight Show set without warning. Carson was mid-conversation with another guest. the rhythm smooth, the atmosphere calm. Then, out of nowhere, the curtain shifted. Rickles strolled onto the stage like a man crashing a neighbor's party. The audience gasped, then exploded in applause. Carson froze. This wasn't in the script. Rickles shook the guest's hand as if he belonged there, then turned to Carson and deadpanned, "Johnny, I was in the neighborhood. Figured I'd drop in and save your ratings." The room erupted. Carson leaned back in disbelief, laughter spilling out despite his effort to stay composed, not stopping. Rickles wandered behind Carson's desk, shuffling papers with mock disgust. "This is what you work with? No wonder Ed McMahon does all the heavy lifting." The crowd roared, clapping and stomping their feet as Carson turned crimson, his trademark cool dismantled in seconds. The brilliance was in the chaos, in an era when television was meticulously rehearsed. Rickles tore up the playbook. He didn't just crack jokes. He hijacked the very framework of late-night TV, and Carson allowed it to happen. For the millions watching, it was pure exhilaration. The rare sight of the king of late night, blindsided in his own house. And when Rickles walked off, the studio still shook with the sound of laughter. At moment one, Don Rickles gave Johnny Carson the ultimate tribute by roasting him on the very night America celebrated his legacy. It was supposed to be a solemn moment. Carson was nearing retirement, and the Tonight Show stage had turned into a parade of friends and legends, each offering heartfelt words. But Rickles was never built for sincerity. He walked out, adjusted the microphone, and said with mock reverence, "Ladies and gentlemen, a man who made television safe for insomniacs, Johnny Carson." The crowd burst into laughter, breaking the tension instantly. Carson, smiling but wary, braced himself as Rickles continued, 30 years on the air, and still no personality. That's talent. Johnny." The audience howled, clapping until the cameras shook. Even Carson doubled over, his eyes watering as he laughed at his own expense. Then Rickles softened, just a little. He looked at Carson, smiled, and quipped, "All kidding aside, nobody else would have let me get away with this. Thank you, Johnny. You're the best hockey puck I ever knew." The audience rose to its feet. Carson chuckled, but behind the grin his eyes glistened. It was the perfect send-off. Not with tears, but with laughter. For fans, it was a reminder of what made their bond legendary. Carson was the king of late night, but Rickles was the fearless court jester, bold enough to mock the throne, yet loving enough to honor it. As the laughter fades and the clips rewind in memory, one truth remains clear. These moments weren't just comedy, they were pieces of television history. Johnny Carson, with his calm wit and impeccable timing, built The Tonight Show into an American ritual. But it was guests like Don Rickles who reminded us why Carson was more than a host. He was the king of late night. Rickles' fearless humor, his ability to pierce through glamour and ego, only worked because Carson allowed it. He gave Rickles the stage, the space, and even himself as the target. That generosity of spirit created something timeless, the kind of comedy that felt alive, unpredictable, and unforgettable. For viewers who lived through the golden age, these exchanges still echo like old songs, and for new generations discovering them decades later, the magic is undimmed. You don't just see jokes, you see friendship, trust, and a shared joy that no script could manufacture. As the Tonight Show theme drifts softly in the background, and the image of Carson bowing to his audience fades into sepia light. One thing is certain. The partnership between Carson and Rickles was lightning in a bottle, and it reminds us why, even now, Johnny Carson remains the eternal king of late night. We've laughed, we've remembered, and we've seen how Don Rickles could turn Johnny Carson's Tonight Show into pure, unpredictable magic. But now the question is yours. Which moment made you laugh the hardest? Was it the night Carson turned red under Rickles' relentless insults, or the time Rickles barged in uninvited and stole the show? And here's a bigger challenge. Who was the better chaos maker, Don Rickles or Robin Williams? Both left Carson helpless in his chair, but for entirely different reasons. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's settle it once and for all. If you enjoyed reliving these legendary Tonight Show memories, don't forget to hit subscribe. That way, you won't miss the next episode in our series, Carson's Best Guests, where we revisit the icons who turned late-night television into something unforgettable. Stay tuned, because the laughter doesn't end here.